Hello and welcome. I'm Michal from Conflict, and today we're introducing the second part of our series on the history of the workers' movement. In the first part, we looked at the Industrial Revolution, which took place in the 1760s in England, and how it brought about the changes that created the modern world, and how on the continent, particularly in France, it led to political revolution. So after the French Revolution, Europe is thrown into a series of wars. They're called the Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars. Sometimes they're called the Wars of the Coalitions. And they last until 1815. Napoleon is first defeated in 1814, and the Russians occupy Paris. And after they occupy Paris, there's a congress opened in Vienna to decide how to sort of run the new Europe. It's run by the Austrian diplomat Metternich, and it's run by the Conservatives who want to sort of put a lid on the revolution. The sort of Congress divides up Europe. It takes the gains of France off it. It gives land to Prussia in the German states and in Poland, to Russia in the rest of Poland, and to Austria mostly in Italy. It also brings back the sort of autocracy, and in France they put a new king on the throne. Unfortunately for the Allies, Napoleon comes back, and he comes back for 100 days, raises a new army, and he's eventually defeated by the British and the Prussians at the Battle of Waterloo. And the thing that they can't change is the changing economic system. And it's the changing economic system that creates the new classes that threatens the autocracy. Okay. And the Industrial Revolution continues to spread. Belgium becomes the second industrial country in the world. It becomes this way because of its proximity to Britain, because of coal and iron in the south of the country. So Belgium becomes perhaps the second country to embrace the new economic system, even before France. This is spurred on by its proximity to Britain and the abundance of coal and iron in the south of the country. Belgium's the world's second industrial power. In Germany, the Ruhr, this area around Dortmund, has become by 1809 known as miniature England. The fact that Germany is split into all of these small countries slows down the process because the train is an important part of the industrial process. And when you've got different countries, some of them as big as a city, they're not making trains between them. When Germany is eventually unified in 1871, the road's clear for it to become, as it is today, Europe's strongest economic power. All of this is based on the adaptation of British technology, or by British engineers and entrepreneurs moving abroad in search of opportunities. In the lands controlled by the Habsburg crown, the Industrial Revolution appeared first in Czechia, with the introduction of the factory system to Prague and Brno, and Brno becomes known as the Moravian Manchester. It was back in France, though, that political revolution arose once more. Louis XVIII had died childless in 1824, and his younger brother, who was a complete reactionary, became Charles X at the age of 66. Almost immediately, he began to make attacks upon the Charter of 1814, which had established the monarchy, The regime was a monarchy and a constitutional monarchy, but not a parliamentary one. On his coronation, Charles had promised to uphold this charter. But early in his reign, he started to attack its very basis. After 8 months in power, he brought in an anti-sacrilege law, which included the death penalty for certain offences. This was seen by many as violating the guarantees of equality of religious belief that were in the Charter. Then he clashed with Parliament over financial questions, including inheritance laws and indemnities. His position on these questions proved unpopular, and he suffered a major defeat over inheritance and then over attempting to introduce censorship laws. The decisive event, though, came when he decided to dissolve the National Guard of Paris. This organisation had been established by the Revolution of 1789, and Charles was reviewing the Guard when they started to protest against him. They were supposed to offer some symbolic show of loyalty to the king, and instead they shouted insults, demanded that his ministers resign, and cursed the Jesuits. It was too much for Charles, and he disbanded the Guard the next day. Unfortunately for him, he didn't take away their weapons when he disbanded them. These would come out again in the Revolution, and it would prove to be a big mistake. In March 1830, the Parliament passed a motion of no confidence in the king and his government. In return, Charles dissolved the Parliament. 2 months later, in new elections, the radicals beat the supporters of the king, winning nearly 2/3 of the seats. In response, Charles dissolved the Parliament again, brought in increased censorship and restricted the franchise. The people responded with revolution. The July Revolution, or the Three Glorious Days, is the one that inspired the painting of the bare-breasted liberty leading the people. Led to a new king being placed on the throne, a distant cousin of the king. There would be an attempt to overthrow him 2 years later and to bring back the Republic. This is the one that inspired Victor Hugo's famous book, Les Miserables, and it was put down, as we read in the book or we saw in the film or the musical. But essentially, monarchy in France is on its last legs. It's got less than a couple of decades to go. The Industrial Revolution is beginning to create a world system at this point. In the past, peasant revolts had tended to be geographically isolated. As we shall see in 1848, when the revolution sweeps across the continent, modern transport and communication not only brings about the further spread of the new economic system, but also allows the spread of revolutionary ideas. The following month sees a revolution in the southern provinces of the Netherlands, which brings about the creation of Belgium. 1830 also sees a revolution in the German state of Brunswick and failed revolutions in both Italy and Poland. As today, for example, in the Arab Spring, revolution spreads across national boundaries with the speed of a train. It's in this period that we see the emergence of socialist ideas. These ideas emerge first in the countries where the Industrial Revolution is strongest, namely England and France. Perhaps the first socialist in Britain, certainly the first person to use the word socialist in the English language, was the Welsh textile manufacturer Robert Owen, who co-founded the cooperative movement. He'd made his money, like many in the sort of rising bourgeois class, from a textile mill. Unlike most of them, though, he decided to spend it buying a town and setting up a socialist community in North America. It only lasted for a couple of years. After this, he returned to Britain and involved himself in trade unions, the cooperatives and workers' causes. An earlier English radical had been Thomas Spence. He advocated common ownership of land and a democratic equality of the sexes. The French socialist Charles Fourier is credited with the first use of the term feminism, and he argued for what we could call gay rights before the terms gay and homosexual even existed. Also in France, Saint Simeon talked to the working class and how its needs needed to be addressed to have an effective and just society. These early pioneers would later be described as utopian socialists. While they saw that a socialist word was desirable, they thought it could be implemented by people from all classes adopting their ideas. They disregarded the class struggle and saw that socialism could be brought about not by social revolution but by discussion and force of argument. Alongside the spread of these ideas by intellectuals, who generally came from the new owning classes, we can see the growth and spread of trade unionism. Starting in Britain, it partly had its roots in friendly societies, which operated as a sort of early mutual insurance fund. Workers collected money for when one of their members fell on hard times. But it also had its roots in the violent militancy of Luddism, which we talked about in the last episode. These workers' organisations were initially viciously repressed. In 1820 in Scotland, 60,000 workers rose and went on a general strike. In 1832, striking workers seized control of the towns of Merthyr Tydfil, which, although a very small town today, was then an important industrial centre in South Wales. 10,000 striking workers raised the red flag, this is its first recorded use, and held the town for 4 days while spreading the strike to surrounding regions. Despite the repression, the unions grew massively. They were legalised in Britain in 1824, and in 1842, a Chartist-inspired general strike involved about 500,000 workers. It was the biggest industrial dispute of the 19th century. The Trade Union Congress, which is a federation of unions from all trades and industries that still exists today, was founded in Manchester in 1868. Trade unionism spread rapidly across the Atlantic to North America and also to France, the Low Countries and Germany. The next generation of socialist thinkers differentiated themselves from the utopian socialists. In fact, they believed that socialism could not be brought about by force of argument and establishing socialist communities, but it needed direct political action from the working class. Here we find the first anarchists like Proudhon and Bakunin, and communists like Marx and Engels. In 1847, Marx and Engels began to write a document that would eventually be called the Communist Manifesto for an organisation called the League of the Just, which later becomes the Communist League. When it was finally published in 1848, in February, revolution was spreading across Europe. Its opening line read, "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism." The revolutions of 1848 spread across the whole continent and affected over 50 countries. It's difficult then to talk about the causes of each separate revolution. In general, though, we can come back to the social tensions caused by the Industrial Revolution, made worse by the economic crisis of 1845 to 1847. The primary cause for this crisis was potato blight. The blight was a disease of potatoes that came from Europe to North America, and maybe it's most remembered today for the Great Irish Famine of 1845 to 1852. During the famine, Ireland loses nearly half its population due to starvation and immigration. It first arrived in Europe, though, in Belgium in June 1845 and destroyed over 75% of the Flemish potato harvest that summer. If we don't include Ireland, the blight caused about 100,000 deaths, mainly in the Low Countries, Germany and France. it was only stopped by the drought of 1847. That too, though, increased food prices, causing massive immiserisation across the continent. Workers and peasants reacted. In France, in 1846 and 1847, they saw over 400 food riots. Other factors were causing unhappiness amongst the peasantry. Similar to what had happened in England, most of the Central European countries went through something like the enclosures. The land was taken over by the big landowners, and peasants were forced to leave the land and go to the cities. In the East, where serfdom still persisted, uprisings happened with repeated frequency. Perhaps the largest was the Galician Peasants' Uprising of 1846 in Austria. For those who went to the cities, life wasn't much better. At a time when the food prices were increasing because of famine and drought, the mass influx of people from the countryside caused a decline in real wages. At this point, most workers on the continent were still artisans, and the new factories threatened their livelihood. In a similar reaction to the Luddite movement in England, we saw major insurrections. In France, in 1831 and 1844, weavers in Lyon rose up, as they did in Silesia in 1844. Amongst the middle classes, their new university educations were unable to provide them with the jobs that would allow them to live like they thought their status demanded. Those who came out of university with degrees were unable to find suitable work, and this contributed significantly to the revolutionary turmoil. New ideologies such as liberalism, nationalism and radicalism spread across the continent, and amongst the working class, anarchist and communist ideas. In 1847, everyone knew that revolution was coming. The first revolution of 1848 happened in Palermo, Sicily, in January on the 12th. But the real spark that causes the whole fire was the February Revolution in France, which brings to the end 1,500 years of French monarchy. Political meetings were banned in France. What middle-class radicals did to get around this ban was to hold banquets. The government was wise to this ploy. It knew they were political meetings. Perhaps, though, it was not wise in general. It decided to ban a banquet on the 22nd of February. The organisers declared that the banquet would still go ahead, and they would also organise an illegal political demonstration. The government banned both of these, and the organisers backed down. That should have been the end of it. But workers and students who've been mobilising for the demonstration refused to back down and continued with their plans. Because the demonstration had been banned, municipal guardsmen had been withdrawn from the area. So when the demonstration started, the protesters found there was no one there to oppose them. The crowds were too large for the unprepared state forces, and they began to erect barricades. The king reacted by dismissing the government, but this wasn't enough for the protesters. They wanted more. On the 23rd of February, a confrontation between soldiers and demonstrators ended in a massacre. 57 people were killed, and the city was outraged. Fighting spread all across the city. By noon the next day, the king had decided to abdicate and fled the city escorted by cavalry. He travelled to England on a boat provided by the British. He would die there 2 years later. The National Assembly, like previously, wanted to install a new king, and they chose a distant relative of the king to put on the throne. Unfortunately, the sort of revolutionary crowd has already burnt the throne. The demonstrators broke into the assembly, and the parliament was forced to declare a republic. The monarchy was over. In the course of 1 week, the news of the revolution spread across the entire continent. In Vienna, Metternich, the guy who planned the Congress that divided Europe, said, "Oh dear, it's all over." By mid-March, similar revolutions had broken out in Vienna, Budapest, Venice, Krakow, Milan, and Berlin, and Munich. In Austria, after 2 days of street fighting, 13th and 15th of March, Metternich was forced to resign and go into exile. The emperor promised a new constitution. Next, revolution broke out in Austrian-controlled Hungary, where the emperor was forced to concede national sovereignty to a parliament within the Habsburg monarchy. Revolutionary governments took power in Milan and Venice, in Austrian-controlled northern Italy. The King of Piedmont, Sardinia, declared war on Austria, and that's how the First War of Italian Independence began. In Berlin, after 1 day of fighting on the barricades on 18th of March, the King of Prussia ordered the army to withdraw and committed himself to liberal government and German unity. Across the smaller German states, revolutions spread like wildfire. They took place in Baden, the Palatinate, Saxony, the Prussian Rhineland, Bavaria, and many others. All across the continent, the old regime was falling. Elections were held for newly established parliaments in France, in Austria proper, and 6 other national parliaments within the Habsburg Empire. In Frankfurt, a national assembly was set up for the whole of Germany. The abolition of censorship and restrictions on political organisations saw a massive increase in both the numbers and the size of both political and labour organisations. In France, in an effort to stop labour unrest, the government began to draft laws containing economic reforms and passed a decree to guarantee work for the unemployed. Across the continent, the revolution appeared to be successful. And so far, we've concentrated on France and Central Europe, but we should mention that the revolutions of 1848 also affected other European countries such as Denmark, Romania, and Ireland, as well as Belgium and Holland, and began to have a truly international aspect with the spread to South America. Canada was given autonomy within the British Empire, and there are even protests in Batavia, which is now the capital of Indonesia. The second half of the year would see a return of the forces of reaction. In France, a division began to emerge between radical workers and the new Republican government. A conservative government was elected, which began to attack the gains of the working class. The left was attacked and its leaders jailed, its newspapers banned, its clubs closed down. The National Workshop Scheme, which had been providing work for the unemployed, was closed down, and this led to 2 attempts to overthrow the government. One on the 15th of May, one on the 22nd of June. The second one ended in massacres. In the Austrian Empire, an uprising in Prague was suppressed by imperial forces. And in Italy, an Austrian victory over the Piedmontese army put the emperor back in control. The local ruler of Croatia was encouraged to invade rebellious Hungary, which led to the beginning of the Hungarian War of Independence. And when protesters in Vienna rose in favour of the Hungarians, they seized control of the city for 3 weeks. They were bloodily suppressed. The Austrian Emperor, Ferdinand I, who, when Metternich had told him originally of the revolution, had responded, "But are they allowed to do that?" Was forced by the government to abdicate. and replaced by his more reactionary nephew, Franz Joseph I. In Germany, the counter-revolution began in autumn with the armistice in the Schleswig War. This war between Prussia and Denmark had started in support of ethnic German rebels in lands subject to the Danish crown. The armistice was forced upon Prussia by Britain and Russia and accepted with reluctance by the Frankfurt Parliament of all of Germany. This caused further uprising across the German region by those who saw this as a betrayal and who were dissatisfied with the slow pace of political reform. These uprisings were crushed by the German states, and in Berlin, the Kaiser, Frederick William IV, dismissed his liberal ministers and imposed a new conservative constitution. In France, Louis Napoleon, nephew of the former empire, was elected as president with the backing of conservatives who expected him to restore public order and suppress radical workers. The springtime of the peoples was over. The next year saw the revolution spread outside major capitals and across the smaller cities of Europe, leading to some successes. Radicals won in elections in France and Austria. Revolutions in Tuscany and in the Papal States saw people starting to make plans for an Italian parliament similar to the German one, and they started the war against Austria again. However, the Austrians won at the Battle of Novara in March and forced the abdication of the King of Piedmont. The revolutionary Roman Republic, which had replaced the Papal States, was defeated in July, and Venice in August. In Austria, the new emperor rejected proposals of reform. He dissolved the Reichstag and implemented a new conservative constitution for the entire empire, which brought an end to Hungarian autonomy. The Hungarian response to this was to declare full independence from Austria and establish a revolutionary provisional government, which immediately attacked Austria. Was successful and recaptured lots of Hungarian territory. Austria was in a crisis at this point, and they turned to the Russian Tsar for help in what was called the Holy Struggle Against Anarchy. 200,000 fresh Russian troops tipped the balance of the war for Austria, and Hungary, which was the last remaining revolutionary state, was forced to capitulate. In many ways, the revolution was seen as a failure. Communists and anarchists denounced what they saw as their betrayal by the bourgeoisie. For nationalists, particularly in Italy, Germany and Hungary, their desires for national states had been crushed. For the liberals, their dreams of democratic governance were over. In most countries, the absolutist monarchs were back in control. And even in France, Louis Napoleon, the president, was elected as emperor by referendum and started to embark on reactionary policies. Yet by the 1870s, most of the revolutionaries' goals had been fulfilled. A national state was established in Italy in 1861. The German Empire was proclaimed in 1871 after their victory in the Franco-Prussian War. Reactionary governments across Europe realised that they could not govern in the same way. Feudalism was abolished, first in Germany and Austria, and then in Russia in 1861. At the same time, political and economic gains were being made by the middle classes. The only people whose demands weren't satisfied were the workers. The International Working Men's Association, which is sometimes known as the First International, had been formed in London in 1864. It was initially the creation of British and French trade unionists, but grew to include representatives from across Europe and a wide range of different political tendencies in the workers' movement. It supported strikes and workers' struggles, but also took positions on the international events of the day. It supported Garibaldi's campaign for Italian independence, the Union side in the American Civil War in its campaign to abolish slavery, and it opposed the Russian repression in Poland. Although it contained various political tendencies, Marx was eventually chosen to draft the inaugural address. He summarised in this address the situation of the working class in Europe, talked about the victory of the British trade unions in their 10-hour day campaign, and ended with the slogan from the manifesto: "Proletarians of all countries unite." The working class now had its own party, committed to achieving its emancipation for itself. The Franco-Prussian War, which resulted in the formation of Germany, ended in defeat for France. Napoleon III was captured and eventually went into exile in England, where he too died after 2 years. After the defeat, the National Guard and workers of Paris rose in the last great uprising of the 19th century in France. They established the Commune, a revolutionary form of government, which was copied by workers in different parts of the country, who rose and established their own communes in Lyon, Saint-Étienne and Marseille. Although the Commune was eventually crushed by French and German troops, it would serve as an inspiration for revolutionaries for the next century. For the time, though, the workers' movement was in defeat. The International dissolved due to factional infighting between anarchists and communists, and the spark, though, of revolution had been lit. In part 2, we've discussed the European revolutions of the 19th century and the establishment of workers' independent political organisation. In part 3 next month, we'll be considering the national question in more depth, turning our attention to the Balkans, the rise of national movements here, and the decline and fall of the Ottoman Empire.